I want you to imagine something. Picture this. It's May 2022. You're standing in the middle of a supermarket in Colombo, Sri Lanka. You've got a pocket full of cash. You've got a platinum credit card tucked in your wallet. You've worked 60-hour weeks in IT management for years, specifically to secure a comfortable life. You reach for a bag of rice. Gone. The shelf is bare. You move to the produce section. In that moment, it doesn't matter that your bank account says you're wealthy. In a calorie vacuum, your digital net worth isn't wealth. Maybe the food didn't vanish because of a war on your doorstep. It vanished because the complex, invisible web of global logistics simply snapped while you were sleeping. Now, here is the thought that actually keeps me awake at night. When you look closely at every major famine I've ever autopsied, from the horrors of the Soviet Holodomor to the Venezuelan diet, they all operated on one iron law. When the local crops failed, you leaned on the global market. The global supermarket was the lifeboat. It was the ultimate insurance policy. But ask yourself this: what happens when the lifeboat itself runs out of fuel? What happens when the breadbaskets of the world, Russia, Ukraine, the US Midwest, Brazil, begin showing the same terminal symptoms of soil exhaustion and logistical breakdown simultaneously? You are left holding absolutely nothing. No imports, no backup plan, just a brutal choice between starvation and dependency. And let's be real for a second. We are not talking about theoretical physics here. The biology is already in motion. The pattern you've seen in the history books regarding every civilization collapse, soil degradation, overextension, resource depletion, is happening right now. But here's the catch. Our current model assumes one massive safety valve. We operate on the belief that we can always magically turn fossil fuels into food via synthetic fertilizers. The entire green revolution depends on cheap energy remaining the exception. It's an eternal input that tries to defy the laws of botany. Except it doesn't. It never has. The average lifespan of an intensive agricultural system is roughly 60 harvests before the topsoil is destroyed. Modern industrial monoculture really began scaling up in the 1950s. Do that arithmetic. We are 70 years in. We aren't beating the odds anymore. We are eating our own tail. We are farming on borrowed dirt. By the end of this breakdown, you'll understand exactly why the traditional buffers we rely on, warehoused grain, supermarket just-in-time delivery, even government ration cards, might fail you when every major harvest slides into deficit together. And more importantly, what actually grows when the supply chain stops? The question isn't if anymore. The question is whether you are planting now or standing in that Colombo supermarket wondering where the rice went. While we are distracted by headlines, governments are voting with their silos. Look at China. The Chinese state began stockpiling grain at an unprecedented rate starting in 2021 and accelerating right through 2025. By late last year, the USDA estimated China held a staggering 69% of the world's corn reserves, 60% of its rice, and 51% of its wheat. They have less than 20% of the world's population. That isn't food security. That is panic preparation dressed up in logistical language. Their officials didn't even hide the motivation. President Xi explicitly called for a national food security barrier. Translation? They don't trust the global market anymore. Not for the long term. And this isn't some random anomaly. India banned the export of non-basmati white rice in 2023, just to secure their own domestic supply. Indonesia restricted palm oil exports. Nations are putting up walls. They are quietly building parallel calorie infrastructures, economies that can actually function when global shipping lanes freeze. Here is what supply chain critics often miss. Governments aren't hoarding grain because they want to act like Bond villains and manipulate prices. They are hoarding it because grain is the only strategic asset that cannot be digitally printed by a central bank. After the Black Sea grain corridor collapsed in 2023, millions of tons were left stranded. Every import-dependent nation got the message loud and clear. Anything that has to cross a border to feed you can be stopped at that border. Calories don't have a backup server. Now, here is where it gets uncomfortable. When you leave a comment saying, "The grocery prices are artificial," you're not wrong, but you might be looking at the wrong input. The mechanism is visible. It's called the Haber-Bosch dependency, and it is the Achilles heel embedded in every single meal you eat. Here is the brutal contradiction. For the world to feed 8 billion people, we must inject nitrogen into the soil. That requires massive amounts of natural gas to produce ammonia. We are effectively eating fossil fuels. But as energy markets fracture and prices become volatile, the cost of farming explodes relative to the crop yield. Eventually, the physics just cracks. In 2022, fertilizer prices spiked 300%. Farmers in Africa and South America simply stopped planting because the math didn't work anymore. Today, it's the same dilemma, just on a different scale. Global aquifers are draining. The Ogallala Aquifer in the U.S. Midwest, which irrigates 1/3 of American grain, is dropping at a rate that recovery cannot match. We are mining water like it's coal. Now, I know what some analysts say. Don't worry, technology will save us. The ag tech salvation. When drought strikes, we will just switch to GMO, drought-resistant seeds and vertical farming. We'll boost yield even as the environment falls apart. But here is what that theory misses. It only works as long as the grid stays up. Vertical farming is an energy sink. It replaces the sun with LEDs. What happens when the energy grid destabilizes? What happens when the proprietary supply chains for those patented seeds break down? What happens when you can't download the software update for your John Deere tractor? The tech salvation theory breaks. Survival doesn't flee into the cloud. Survival flees into tangible systems that can't be hacked, can't be switched off, and don't require a monthly subscription. Which brings us to the elephant in the room. There is no safe supermarket. There are only safe sources. Go back and read your own comments on my last video. You guys already know this. The shelves are shrinking. Quality is dropping. You are seeing with your own eyes what agronomists see, but when the Soviet Union collapsed, Cubans survived on organoponicos, urban gardens. When the Great Depression hit, Americans survived on homesteads. But what happens when the trucking networks and the diesel pipelines and the fertilizer shipments all show late-stage symptoms together? Where do you get your calories? You don't flee to another grocery store. You flee to assets that exist outside the industrial system entirely. Here is the forensic breakdown of what actually survives. First, heirloom seeds. I'm not talking about hybrid F1 seeds that don't reproduce true to type. And I'm not talking about panic-buying buckets of freeze-dried sludge. I mean open-pollinated, non-GMO seeds that you can harvest and replant forever. If you don't own the genetics, you don't own the future. Governments understand this. That's why Norway built the Svalbard Global Seed Vault. They know biological diversity evaporates when the monoculture fails. Second, productive soil. Not a manicured lawn. Living, compost-rich biomass that generates nutrition regardless of whether the fertilizer ships arrive. But here is the risk nobody wants to talk about. Owning land isn't enough if you don't know how to bleed it. My grandmother survived post-war Europe not because she had a deed to a farm, but because she knew how to cure meat and can vegetables. She could preserve, ferment, stretch. When the supply chain fails, skills become calories. You want to be the person who can turn a raw carcass into 6 months of protein. The one who can identify medicinal weeds. The one who can repair a fence without a trip to Home Depot. During the siege of Leningrad, people traded diamond necklaces for a loaf of bread. The jewelry was irrelevant. Caloric utility was everything. Let me take you to Venezuela, 2017. One more time. The street vendor selling arepas. You know what bought a meal that day? A silver coin, a fresh chicken, a medical antibiotic. Anything except the bolivar. The currency was dead. Only biological assets had value. So where are we seeing these signs right now? Egypt, Pakistan, Haiti, Nigeria? Again, these aren't random outliers. These are test cases. They are the early dominoes. And the elephant in the room? The Western world is showing stage 3 symptoms. Topsoil erosion rates are 100 times faster than formation. Pollinator collapse. Supply chain fragility. This is not agricultural policy. This is late-stage biological capture of the food supply. When you comment, "We are one bad harvest away from chaos," you are tracking the right historical analog. Except this time, there is no new world to expand into. There is no safe harbor. There are only gardens that survive when the ports close. So, here is your choice. You can wait for the consensus. Wait for the nightly news to tell you why rationing is actually good for the environment. By the time they admit the food system is broken, your window to buy seeds and tools has already closed. Hunger moves faster than you can learn to farm. Or you position now. A deep pantry, heirloom genetics, water filtration, community. Because facing a famine alone is a luxury. Collapse doesn't permit. The question isn't if the industrial food chain fractures. The question is whether you will have the capacity to feed your family when it does, or whether you will be standing in that Colombo supermarket staring at empty shelves. If this forensic breakdown gave you a new lens, hit subscribe. This breakdown was inspired by your comments on the last video. Specifically, those of you pointing out that the food supply is just as leveraged as the banks. You are ahead of the curve. If you are already planting for what's coming, and tell me what systemic failure you want me to autopsy next. I read every single one. The only question is whether you will see it coming, or be standing in line wondering why a bag of rice costs a month's wages. Now go plant something before you have to.